Clint Eastwood possesses an enormous fortune, worth as much as $375 million. It stands as a powerful testament to a towering cinematic icon, to the rugged image of the lone cowboy, and to masterpieces that have been etched permanently into the history of Hollywood. Yet few people know that every dollar in that colossal fortune was paid for with blood and tears. There were years of being rejected for having an appearance deemed not up to standard, broken marriages, and loud, headline-grabbing lawsuits that sent shockwaves through the public. And in the final stretch of his life, the 5-year-old man is forced to live with an aching sense of emptiness and loneliness despite being surrounded by staggering wealth. And before we begin this deeply emotional story, if you, too, feel compassion for his silent sacrifices, please leave a heart to share that feeling with us. Few people know that before becoming a symbol of strength and cold detachment on the silver screen, Clint Eastwood was once the raw embodiment of American-style failure. After leaving the United States Air Force, he carried with him a very simple dream: to enter Hollywood and change his life. But the film capital did not welcome him with a red carpet. It greeted him with indifferent shakes of the head. Despite diligently studying acting and even signing a contract with Universal Pictures, Clint remained nothing more than a faint, forgotten name, lost among a forest of perfectly polished stars of that era. Then came the most ruthless moment of all. Universal coldly fired him for a simple reason. They did not need an actor with an oversized Adam's apple and a muttering, raspy voice flaws considered impossible to fix in a Hollywood that worshipped physical appearance above all else. In a single afternoon, his cinematic dream collapsed, and Clint Eastwood was pushed out of the studio gates like someone who no longer had any use. With no roles and no contracts, he plunged straight to the bottom of society. Clint took on every job he could just to survive. Fixing plumbing, working at a gas station, digging swimming pools under the skin-scorching California sun. Each hour of labor earned him only a few loose dollars, while at home waited his wife, Maggie Johnson, and the crushing pressure of being a man who could not provide, who had no future and no standing. That poverty did not merely wear down his body, it carved a scar deep into his mind, one that would never fade. It was during those years of being pushed to the brink that Clint Eastwood learned Hollywood's cruelest lesson. Talent alone cannot keep anyone alive without power and money to back it up. The haunting fear of instability planted in him an obsession with controlling his own fate at any cost. An obsession that would later turn him into one of the most unshakable figures in the American film industry. Many years later, Clint Eastwood spoke only briefly about that dark period. "I was once so poor that I understood, if you don't take control, you'll always be the one who gets discarded." In 1959, opportunity finally smiled on Clint Eastwood. He landed the role of Rowdy Yates in the Western television series Rawhide. With a starting salary of $700 per episode, his life finally became less suffocating. But for a man whose ambition reached far beyond the small screen, Rawhide was not a launch pad, it was a gilded prison. For nearly a decade, 1,959, 1,965. Clint was locked into the image of a clean-cut, obedient cowboy, always following orders, always behaving exactly as CBS demanded. He was not allowed to revise the script, not allowed to adjust the character, and most importantly, not allowed to look rough or ugly. Clint gradually grew to despise the good boy image Hollywood forced upon him. He longed for rebellion, yet contractual chains kept him trapped. At that moment, Clint realized a cold truth. No matter how high the pay, a hired actor is still just a pawn. To escape being a pawn, the board itself must be overturned. In 1964, his frustration reached its breaking point. As Hollywood turned its back on his sharper, edgier ideas, Clint received a strange offer from across the ocean. An unknown Italian director named Sergio Leone wanted him to star in a hybrid Western inspired by Japanese cinema, specifically Yojimbo, with a meager fee of $15,000 and a total production budget of just $200,000. In the glittering eyes of Hollywood, the crude working conditions on that set were nothing but a joke, an insult to any actor with even a shred of self-respect. Everyone tried to dissuade him, calling it a step backward into the mud. But Clint, someone who had already hit rock bottom, sensed the smell of opportunity rising from those ashes. Ignoring all the ridicule, he flew to Spain with nothing but a few old clothes and a box of cigars he had bought himself. And there, on the set of A Fistful of Dollars, he carried out a stunning transformation that no major American studio would ever have dared to allow. He ruthlessly stripped away long, sentimental dialogue and replaced it with chilling silence. He turned the very flaws he had once been mocked for, the muttering voice, the squinting eyes burned by the sun, the stone-cold face, into his own lethal, unmistakable weapons. From that moment, the man with no name was born. No past to cling to, no morality to lean on, no ideals to hide behind, only a lone cowboy walking silently through a barren desert, where every decision is measured in money and every breath is reduced to pure survival instinct. That $15,000 gamble not only exploded at the European box office before spreading to America, it completely shattered the narrow mold Hollywood had trapped Clint Eastwood in for years. It transformed him from a typecast television actor into the face of an entirely new kind of cowboy, colder, quieter, and far more dangerous. Riding that momentum, Clint continued working with Sergio Leone on the next two films of the Dollars trilogy, For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. From that point on, the balance of power on set began to shift slowly but irreversibly. With each film, Clint's voice carried more weight, his control expanded a little further, and his pay rose in ways that forced Hollywood to re-examine the man they had once cast aside. If in the first film he earned only $15,000, by For a Few Dollars More, that figure had multiplied several times. And when The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly went into production, Clint Eastwood not only received around $250,000, but also a percentage of the box office profits, a privilege that had almost never existed for an actor who had been dismissed as washed up just a few years earlier. During this period, although Hollywood had yet to hand him prestigious golden statues, recognition arrived by another path, slower but far more enduring. From European critics to audiences around the world, appreciation steadily grew. Over time, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly became not merely a commercial success, but one of the greatest Western films in cinematic history, repeatedly appearing on classic rankings for decades to come. Yet, at the same time as that success, invisible pressures also began to cling tightly to Clint. While Europe hailed him as the new face of modern Western cinema, in the United States, Hollywood continued to view him with caution, treating spaghetti westerns as second-rate, foreign, low-budget films, and anyone who ventured into them as someone gambling with, or even deliberately destroying, their own career. Clint was left suspended in a cold paradox. In Italy and across Europe, he was a rising star, discussed and admired as the symbol of a new wave. Yet in Hollywood, he was still merely the television cowboy from Rawhide, a name not safe enough to trust, not clean enough for long-term investment. And so, even as he was being celebrated, that success was dismissed as a temporary fluke, an improbable statistical error. Hollywood simply waited, waiting for the next film to fail, waiting for the fragile glow of fame to collapse, and waiting for Clint Eastwood to be called out as a short-lived phenomenon. But Clint did not allow the story to end the way others expected. Instead of accepting a position under suspicion, he quickly proved himself through a bold choice that very few actors of that era would even dare to consider. Firing his agent, taking full control of his career, and in 1967, officially founding Malpaso Productions. The name Malpaso, which in Spanish means a wrong step or misstep, was a cold, almost arrogant irony aimed directly at those who had once believed he was committing career suicide by diving into spaghetti westerns. For Clint, if the entire world insisted it was a mistake, then he would turn that mistake into the foundation of his own power. At Malpaso, Clint was no longer just an actor hired project by project. He was the center of every decision, from the script and shooting schedule to the budget and the way each film was operated and distributed. An actor, for the first time in his generation, behaving like a true boss. Clint's strategy was brutally simple: absolute control. While most Hollywood actors of the time were still satisfied with fixed salaries, Clint chose a different path, riskier, but exponentially more profitable: profit participation, taking a percentage of the earnings. He understood something many did not dare to contemplate. If the film failed, he would fail alongside it. But if the film became a hit, the money would no longer flow entirely into the studio's hands. And that gamble was proven by a name that would haunt Hollywood for decades to come: Dirty Harry. When Dirty Harry, 1971, was released, the image of Inspector Harry Callahan, cold, uncompromising, and indifferent to fashionable moral standards, immediately became a cultural phenomenon. While the public fiercely debated the film's violence and individualism, the box office offered no debate at all. The movie generated massive revenue relative to its budget, and more importantly, a significant portion of that money did not flow to Warner Brothers, but straight into Malpaso. Clint Eastwood, once dismissed as a lucky break in Europe, officially became a real player on Hollywood's chessboard. But money was only half the story. What turned Clint into a durable money-printing machine was not how much he earned, but how he earned it. Shaped by years of digging swimming pools and doing manual labor just to survive, Clint carried a lifelong obsession with waste. He despised film sets where money was burned through hesitation, directorial ego, and endless retakes just to feel a little more emotional. From that mindset, Clint's cheap and fast filmmaking style was born. He became famous for his one-take rule. If a scene worked, even if it was not perfect by elaborate artistic standards, he moved on. While many directors shot the same scene 20 or 30 times, Clint often finished in 1 or 2 takes. As a result, his films were consistently completed ahead of schedule and under budget, something almost unheard of in Hollywood. And with profit sharing in place, every dollar saved in production costs became pure profit flowing back to Malpaso. It was during the 1970s and 1980s that Clint Eastwood quietly carried out a transformation without fanfare. He continued starring in a long line of action films and westerns, expanding the Dirty Harry brand through multiple sequels, while also experimenting with genres that seemed incompatible with his tough image, from comedies like Every Which Way But Loose to roles with deeper psychological layers. On the surface, Clint remained a familiar box office star. Beneath it, he was learning how to become a true director. Unlike many actors who step behind the camera out of vanity or a thirst for power, Clint viewed directing as an essential part of controlling the story. He directed steadily and quietly, without spectacle, treating each film as another lesson in narrative rhythm, restraint, and absolute trust in performance over visual effects. For a long time, Hollywood still labeled him a self-directing actor, a half-hearted tag. Clint did not argue, he waited. By the 1990s, at a time when many stars of his generation were fading into nostalgia, Clint Eastwood delivered his decisive strike. Unforgiven was not merely a Western, it was an indictment of the cowboy myth Hollywood had long worshipped. The aging, weary William Money, haunted by past violence, directly deconstructed the man-with-no-name persona of years before. This time, Hollywood could not look away. Unforgiven won the Academy Awards for Best Picture and Best Director, officially canonizing Clint Eastwood as a major filmmaker, no longer a fortunate outsider. From that point on, Clint's directing career entered a deeper phase. He consistently released heavyweight films centered on morality, guilt, memory, and redemption, such as Mystic River and Million Dollar Baby, the latter earning him yet another Oscar. Remarkably, at an age when many had already retired, Clint maintained the same disciplined, frugal, almost ascetic filmmaking style. No one could force him to change. Malpaso was still there, and control remained firmly in his hands. Looking back on the entire journey, Clint Eastwood was never someone Hollywood cherished from the beginning. He did not rise to the top through favor, but through cold, calculated decisions, sometimes seen as reckless, even foolish. Yet it was from those very wrong steps that he built a rare creative empire, one where art and discipline did not oppose each other, where filmmaking did not require extravagance, and where an actor once dismissed as lucky proved that the greatest power in Hollywood lies not in fame, but in the ability to write your own rules. And once he controlled his career, Clint also controlled how money was used, not impulsively, not ostentatiously, but with the same cold calculation that defined his character. While many Hollywood stars burned money on supercars, lavish mansions, and endless parties, Clint quietly did the opposite, methodically acquiring land, piece by piece, in Carmel by the Sea and across the Monterey Peninsula areas that in the 1970s were still untouched, far from Hollywood's glare, and not yet devoured by speculative frenzy. The most controversial deal came in 1986, when Clint spent $5 million to purchase Mission Ranch, a vast historic property on the brink of collapse and slated to be bulldozed for condominiums. To most people, it was a hopeless pile of ruins. To Clint, it was heritage. He saw what the market had not yet recognized: irreplaceable historical value and a stream of passive income capable of lasting for decades. Clint went on to invest millions more restoring Mission Ranch, not to transform it into a flashy resort, but to revive the spirit of the 19th century as authentically as possible. The result was a luxurious yet rustic retreat, attracting elites seeking absolute tranquility and becoming a golden goose, generating steady profits regardless of economic downturns or box office fluctuations. From an actor once considered a fluke, Clint quietly reinvented himself as a real estate investor with a vision a decade ahead of his time. But the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. The very hunger for control that lifted Clint to the peak of power also silently warped his private life, and the greatest tragedy did not fall upon his career, but bore the name Sondra Locke. They met in 1975 on the set of The Outlaw Jose Wales. Sondra Locke, an intelligent, strong-willed, and highly ambitious actress, was quickly drawn into Clint's world. He brought her into his home, turned her into a muse across a string of Malpaso projects, and gave her opportunities to direct, yet at the same time, little by little, he placed her beneath the shadow of his power. On screen, they were a golden couple. Off screen, everything was far more complicated. At that point, Clint had not yet finalized his divorce from his legal wife, Maggie Johnson. Yet he built a relationship that lasted nearly 14 years with Sondra, while she remained without status or a name to stand on. According to what Sondra later revealed in her memoir The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly, and in court records, Clint demanded absolute loyalty while he himself continued to maintain a freewheeling romantic lifestyle. She alleged that he forced her to have 2 abortions, claiming it was not the right time, and even persuaded her to have her fallopian tubes tied, permanently taking away her ability to become a mother, all to ensure she would never become a risk to his career and his image. Sondra Locke gave up almost everything: her youth, her chance to build an independent career, and even the calling of motherhood, just to live inside a vague promise of a shared future. But for Clint, when control was threatened or when a relationship no longer fully served the order he had laid down, loyalty stopped having value. By the late 1980s, when every crack had passed the point of repair, Clint chose an ending as cold as it was cruel. On the 10th of April 1989, while Sondra was standing on the set of Impulse, he quietly had every lock replaced on the house where they had lived together for 14 years. When she returned, No door opened for her anymore, only boxes of belongings left outside the gate, silent as a sentence already handed down. No explanation, no conversation, no chance to negotiate. The man with no name ended that love story with the very thing he did best, an icy decisiveness reserved for the one who lost. Clint Eastwood believed that with power in his hands, everything would eventually sink back into silence like countless other stories Hollywood had buried. But this time, he miscalculated. Sondra Locke did not retreat. She did not disappear. And she did not accept being erased from the life of the man who had once promised her an entire future. She chose to speak, to file a lawsuit, and from that moment on, a long legal war began, bitter, loud, and impossible to conceal. Clint Eastwood agreed to what looked like a humane settlement to close the initial case. He arranged a 3-year directing deal for Locke worth $1.5 million at Warner Brothers. Along with housing and living expenses, a door polished enough to display to the public and sealed tightly enough to control everything behind the curtain. But in reality, that door never led anywhere at all. More than 30 projects Locke proposed were quietly rejected, one after another, with no explanation, no chance to move forward, and she was not allowed to direct a single film. By September 1996, when the matter went to trial in Burbank Superior Court and the jury began leaning toward Locke by a 10-2 margin, the two sides abruptly reached an out-of-court settlement, ending the war with a compensation amount that was never publicly disclosed. This was no longer a story about money or dry contracts. It was the first crack that exposed the shadows Hollywood always tried to look away from. Behind the disciplined Malpaso empire, behind the carefully polished image of an American hero built over decades, were wounds that could not be priced, and not everyone pulled into that machine of power came out intact. As the 2000s arrived, Clint Eastwood was no longer an aging movie star desperately clinging to his glow. He'd become a singular force in Hollywood, someone whose signature alone could make the entire system shift. At an age when many of his peers had already retired and lived off nostalgia, Clint Eastwood entered the most powerful, most profitable, and also the loneliest phase of his life. In the early years of the new century, Clint Eastwood released heavyweight films one after another, and each movie felt like a slice of life distilled from his own inner world. Mystic River in 2003 landed like a cold punch to the audience, an ominous story about crime, memory, and helplessness in the face of fate. A year later, Million Dollar Baby arrived like a slow blade, cutting deep into the viewer's conscience, bringing Clint prestigious Academy Awards and putting a final end to any doubt about his ability as a director. From that point on, Clint no longer needed to prove anything. He stepped into a position very few ever reach, making films because he wanted to tell his story, not because he needed anyone's approval. Alongside the art, money flowed quietly toward Clint Eastwood, in a very Clint Eastwood way. No noise, no bragging, no showy luxury. Through Malpaso Productions, he controlled nearly the entire filmmaking process, from scripts and shooting schedules to post-production. He invested heavily in real estate, especially around Pebble Beach, where he owned hotels, golf courses, and parcels of land valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. Clint did not spend money like a star. He accumulated money like someone who had once known what it meant to have nothing. Every dollar, to him, was tied to memories of the day. Universal fired him, to the years he dug swimming pools and fixed plumbing just to survive. That fear of losing everything turned him into an extreme financial controller, a silent boss whose name Hollywood only dared to whisper. But as power and money reached their peak, Clint Eastwood's personal life continued to fracture in a way that could not be repaired. His marriage to Dina Ruiz, a wife more than 30 years younger than him, gradually became suffocating as the generational gap, differences in worldview, and Clint's closed-off, absolute control lifestyle turned a home once seen as a place of peace into a cold space short on dialogue and drained of emotion. The breaking point came when Dina joined the reality television show Mrs. Eastwood and Company, a decision that made Clint Eastwood, a man who had spent his entire life avoiding the spotlight on his private life, feel betrayed to the core. To him, it was not merely entertainment. It was the moment his private world was exposed, chopped up, and turned into mass consumption, where family conflicts were placed on display, picked apart, and laughed at in front of millions. Once again, Clint Eastwood's personal life became a battlefield, not on a film set, but across tabloid headlines right as he entered his 80s, when a legend should have been allowed to live in silence. In the middle of that chaos, Clint Eastwood did something no one expected. At 84, as his personal life lay in ruins, he walked onto a set and delivered American Sniper. The film not only ignited fierce controversy about politics and morality, it also became the highest-grossing work of his entire career. While many of his generation had faded into the background of history, Clint Eastwood, at 84, still stood at the center of the storm, still made the whole of America argue, rage, admire, and divide. It was a cruel paradox. When his personal life was at its most shattered, his artistic power was at its strongest. Yet during this period, the hidden corners of Clint Eastwood's approach to fatherhood began to emerge through the accounts of his children, especially Scott Eastwood and Francesca Eastwood. The public once believed that being the child of a billionaire Hollywood icon meant silk and privilege, but the reality was harsh to the point of cruelty. Clint enforced a kind of financial martial law in the family. No generous allowance, no paved road, no protection just because you carried the Eastwood name. Scott once admitted, "My dad never made me feel like I was the son of a legend. He wanted me to stand on my own, or fall on my own." Clint forced his children to earn their own living, take their own hits, endure humiliation on their own exactly the way he had lived when he was an unknown man rejected by Hollywood. To him, it was a survival principle, and he told his children bluntly, "No one owes you anything. If you want respect, earn it yourself." But to his children, it became a childhood lacking tenderness, where love was rarely spoken out loud, where validation did not come from a hug, but from results and endurance. Francesca once shared that growing up in the Eastwood family was not easy, because my dad taught us to be strong, but he didn't teach us how to be weak. Clint Eastwood could brilliantly direct complicated relationships on screen, where people were allowed to break down and be forgiven, yet in real life, he seemed never to learn how to soften with the people he loved most because he himself had never been allowed to soften in his own life. Now, in the twilight of his life, Clint Eastwood no longer appears constantly on red carpets or at glamorous Hollywood parties. He chooses a quiet life, mainly in Carmel by the Sea, the coastal town that once saw him serve as mayor years ago, and also the place that reflects most clearly who Clint Eastwood truly is when the lights go out. His current days are tied to quiet mornings, slow rounds of golf, and afternoons watching the ocean at Pebble Beach. No noise, no grandstanding, almost separated from the world he once ruled. After his divorce from Dina Ruiz and the long chain of personal upheavals that followed, Clint has increasingly withdrawn. He still has his children, he still keeps in touch, but the relationship carries the shape of a father watching from a distance, rather than a truly gathered home. The greatest loss in the final chapter came in 2024, when his longtime partner Christina Sandera passed away, a silent but profound blow, because the public rarely saw Clint Eastwood openly acknowledge emotional attachment to anyone. From that moment, loneliness was no longer a philosophical choice. It became a constant state. Clint Eastwood's late-life tragedy is not poverty, illness, or being forgotten. It lies in a far more bitter paradox. A man who controlled nearly everything in his career, from scripts and cameras to budgets and profits, was powerless in the face of the most intimate relationships of his life. He built an empire, but he could not preserve a whole home. He told profound stories about human beings on screen, but in real life he often chose silence instead of dialogue. Even so, Clint Eastwood has never declared a farewell to cinema. He still works, still directs, still stands behind the camera for as long as he remains clear-minded enough to learn something new. To Clint, retirement is not stopping. It is the moment he can no longer control the rhythm of creation, something he has never accepted. And so, in the final chapter of his life, Clint Eastwood exists like a living monument. Wealthy, powerful, quiet, and alone. For decades, Clint Eastwood has also quietly done charity work, but he almost never publicizes the numbers, never sets up a foundation bearing his name to polish his image, and rarely appears in loud fundraising campaigns. He believes helping others should be done in silence, not performed as a role in public. Clint has regularly supported medical, educational, and local community organizations, especially in Carmel by the Sea and Pebble Beach, where he has lived and invested for many years. Many of his donations became known only when recipients spoke up, not because he chose to tell the story himself. Here, the final paradox of Clint Eastwood becomes clearest. A man willing to give so much to society, yet awkward, almost helpless when it comes to giving tenderness within his own family. He left a profound mark on cinema and on the community. But the private emotional voids cannot be filled with money or charitable checks. And so, at the end of a legendary life, Clint Eastwood stands before the night sea, understanding that there are things that cannot be bought, cannot be directed, and cannot be redone, even if the person was Clint Eastwood. And by this point, when all glory has receded deep into the past, people slowly begin to realize that what Clint Eastwood truly leaves behind is not only an enormous fortune or an undeniable cinematic empire. What remains, more quietly, are the long, empty spaces inside a family that was never truly whole. Relationships built more from discipline and silence than from tenderness. He gave his children independence, but the price was a feeling of loneliness, a burden not everyone is strong enough to carry for a lifetime. If this story made you pause and think, please hit like to support the channel and subscribe to continue walking with us on the journeys behind the glow of fame. Thank you for watching.